Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Beis, and in Yirtzeh Hashem today we will be completing Daf Samach Daled Amud Beis and going on to Daf Samach Hey Amud Aleph. We are continuing to learn Hilchas B'tzias Hapas, the halachas that govern the beginning of the Suda, making the hamotzi on the challah, being motzi other people in the berachah, etc., etc. So we pick up today on Samach Daled Amud Beis, about halfway down in the Shulchan Aruch at Siman Samach Zayin Sif Yud Beis. Now, before we go into Sif Yud Beis, we have to remind ourselves a little bit of what we learned in Sif Yud Aleph. In Sif Yud Aleph, the Mechaber introduced us to a very, very interesting concept. He introduced us to the concept that if you have two or more people that are sitting down to have a seuda together, and they're being kaveya seuda ala pas, so they washed and now they're making hamotzi on bread, there's an inyan that if they are kaveya seuda together, if they have a kvius that they're eating together, then one person should make the berachah and be motzi the rest of the people that are there eating together. So the classic case nowadays is you sit down with your family to the Shabbos Suda. You might have 10, 12 people sitting around the table. Everybody goes and washes. The father sits down. He takes the lechem mishnah. He makes hamotzi on the lechem mishnah. He's motzi everybody in the hamotzi. He has kavanah to be motzi them. They have kavanah to be yotze with his bracha. And then he cuts from the lechem mishnah, and he eats, of course, himself from the lechem mishnah, and he gives everybody else from the lechem mishnah. Now, we learned yesterday, we saw in the Biur Halacha, that the reason for this is because of Roiv Am Hadras Melech. We saw that in the Biur Halacha Dibra Maschel Echad Bevarech Lekulam. He says, Mikal Makaim Hidur Mitzvah Hu she'echad yavarach v'yoytzi kulam the Roiv Am Hadras Melech. This is Hidur Mitzvah. Why is it Hidur Mitzvah? What's the inyan of Roiv Am Hadras Melech? Well, we can understand it very simply. When you get up and you make a proclamation, L'chvoid HaMelech, and you do it in public, you make a public proclamation in honor of the king, that is a much greater covet for the Melech and the Malchus than if you go alone in your living room and you say, long live the king, right? If you do it in your living room, it's just between you and the walls. If you do it b'roiv am, it's a much bigger covet for the Melech and for the Malchus. Well, when you're making hamotzi, you're making a bracha, berachah Hashem, you're benching the Rabbeinu Shalom, and you're also acknowledging the fact that your bread and your food all comes from Borei Olam. So this is really a proclamation, l'chvoid the Melech, l'chvoid Borei Kol Olamim, l'chvoid the Rabbeinu Shalom. So b'roiv am, do it b'roiv am. Don't do it between you and your tuna fish sandwich. If everybody is going to wash and make hamotzi for themselves, so each person is making the bracha between himself and his tuna fish sandwich. But if everybody sits down by the table together, and everybody pays attention, and everybody looks up at the father, or the gadol, shebekulam, whoever's making the bracha, and everybody pays attention, and the botzeya, says, Bershus, berachah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz, and then everybody is ma'ames the bracha by saying amen, that's Roiv Am Hadras Melech. Now, what's interesting about this is, the concept that you could be motzi somebody else with a bracha is not a new concept. It's not something that we're learning about for the first time in Siman Samach Zayin in Hilchas B'tzias Hapas. You could go into shul and you could be motzi somebody else's berachas hashachar. Somebody has a suffix, he's not sure, he made berachas hashachar, he didn't, he was up the whole night, so he stands next to you, you say Bershus, berachah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam anois al asech v'vin alafcha ben yom uvein laila. You have kavanah to be motzi him with the bracha, he has kavanah to be yotze the bracha, you would just motzi him with the bracha. Do we find any kind of halacha that in order to be motzi somebody else in a bracha, you need a kvius? Do we find by Hilchas Berachas HaShachar, for example, that you want to be mוציא somebody else's berachas HaShachar, you need to create a kviyus. How are you going to create a kviyus? I don't know. Maybe you both have to stand by the same table, and I don't know. But we don't find such a halacha that there's any requirement of kviyus in any way. Yet, here in Hilchas Petzias HaPas, when it comes to a Suda, we find that there's a requirement of kviyus. There has to be a kviyus in what we learned yesterday in Sif Yud Aleph, back in the day and age when it was common practice that when you were kavei Suuda together, everybody made haseba, everybody leaned on the left side on a couch, and that was the kviyus of a Suda, of everybody eating together. That was the format. So you needed haseba. Without haseba, that's not kviyus of a group of people eating together. Since you don't have a group of people eating together, you can't do this. You can't go ahead and have one person be mוציא somebody else. Why not? What's the difference between that and the bracha of Pekach Ivrim? Why suddenly over here do you need kviyus? Now, the truth is, the first thing that we should start with is really, where does this come from? Where does this whole halacha come from? So the answer is that this comes from Brachas Mem Beis. Let me just open that up over here. Brachas Mem Beis. Brachas Mem Beis. So this is a Mishnah. It's a Mishnah in Brachas Mem Beis Amud Aleph. The Mishnah says, Hayu yoshvin kol echad mevarech la'atzmai. Hayu yoshvin, if they were just sitting without haseba. This is the times of the Gemara when Kviyas Suda was with haseba. So the Mishnah says, Hayu yoshvin, if you had a bunch of people sitting together, so there's no kviyas, kol echad mevarech la'atzmai. Everybody should go ahead and make their own bracha, their own hamotzi. Rashi says, why? De'ein kvas suda b'lo haseba. Because you don't have kviyas. Since you don't have kviyas, everybody should make their own bracha. Hesebu. But if they made haseba, if they leaned on the left side, on the couches, etc., then echad mevarach lekulan. Then everybody should go ahead and then one person should make the bracha, one person should make the hamotzi, and he should be mוציא everybody else. Now, really, the reason this works is shemei kaina. That's why being mוציא somebody else in the bracha works. It's shemei kaina. But yet the Mishnah says that you need this kviyus. You need haseba. The Chazal said that to be mוציא somebody else on a berachas hanenin on food, to be mוציא somebody else with a hamotzi, suddenly now you need kviyus. Why is that? So the truth is that I've been poking around, I've been looking for it. Slick Mirror Cup, that there's a Ritva that talks about this, but it's not in the Chedushay Ritva that I have. I don't know. It could be I have to find, I have to take a look at Yeshiva. I have to look at the Rav Kook Ritva. It might be in there. But one thing is, again, we saw that the reason for this is Roiv Am Hadras Melech. So I was talking to my brother, my older brother of Moshe Meir, and Moshe Meir told me, he said, look, the whole reason why, really, usually we say, mitzvah ba yoser mi b'shluchai. If you have the ability to do a mitzvah on your own, do a mitzvah on your own. Don't have somebody else do it for you. So really, we would think that it would be a bigger milah that you should make your own bracha. Why are you having somebody else make a bracha for you? Elamai, the answer is, Rav Am Hadras Melech. Said Moshe Meir, very nice. He said, if you don't have a kviyus, then there's no Rav Am Hadras Melech. It's true that you have a disparate group of people, but that's not the Rav Am Hadras Melech. The Rav Am Hadras Melech is when you have a group that has a kviyus that's sitting together. Now you have an assembly. When you have an assemblage and you go make the bracha and have everybody say Amen in an assemblage, that's Rav Am Hadras Melech. But without that, you don't have the Rav Am Hadras Melech. Another thing that I heard is that a difference between hamotzi and other brachas is if you have 10 people sitting around, each one eating their own tuna fish sandwich, but they're not a unified group. They're maybe you have 10 yidden in an office building where, 10 different companies have offices, and these people don't really know each other. One works for Merrill Lynch, and one works for Bear Stearns, and one works for Fidelity Investments. I'm picking on brokerage firms. And the office building is a common cafeteria. So now you have 5 Yidden went down to the cafeteria by lunch to eat their tuna fish sandwiches, but they don't have a kvius. They're not sitting down to eat together. This one has his iPad and he's responding to emails. This one is on the phone during the break with his wife. This one is doing this. This one, they have no kvius. If one person is going to be motzie the rest, they're all busy. They're all busy. And they all have what to be busy with. They all have their own sandwiches. They all have their own meal. And they all want to get started eating. So it could be that without a kvius, there's a lack of kavanah. We're afraid that Sai the Motzi and Sai the one that's being yotzei with the berachah don't have the requisite level of kavanah in order to gain the berachah. And that's why you need a kvius. If there's a kvius, so now, like I said, with the Shabbos Suda, the family is looking at Tati, and everybody's paying attention, hopefully, to the berachah. By the way, when I was a little kid, if I brought a toy to the Shabbos table, it could even be a Matchbox toy. My father gave me panim zayafais. He looked at me unhappy, toys out of the room. I wasn't allowed to have a toy in the room during the Shabbos Suda. Nothing doing. But again, in order to make sure that we have the requisite level of kavanah, Sai on the part of the motzi, and Sai on the part the mavarech, and Sai on the part of those, the shoymim, the ones listening to the bracha, we need a kviz. Okay, now, I wanted to get that out of the way, because it's Sif Yud Beis, we're going to continue on the same topic, and I think we need to have a basic understanding in this requirement of kviz. So in Sif Yud Aleph, the Mechaber told me that for one to make the hamotzi and be motzi the shoymim, you need a level of kviz. Back in the day of the Mishnah and the Gemara, that meant heseba. Then the Mechaber went and said, you don't necessarily need heseba. There's another way to gain kvius, said the Mechaber. The Mechaber said you could gain kvius if a group gets together and says, let's eat here. So they were kivei mokim. If they were kivei mokim, that also creates a kvius. They got together and they said, let's eat here. So they were kivei mokim as a group. That also makes a kvius, even though you don't have heseba. Then the Mechaber said, nowadays we don't do heseba. We all sit down around the table together. If we're all sitting by one table together, that creates the kvius. The Ramah said, if you have a father, a head of household, sitting together with his household, since the head of household makes kvius, his heseba, the head of the household makes heseba, since he is sitting b'derech heseba, which creates kvius, even if the rest of the household is not sitting b'heseba, his heseba creates kvius. So we've seen over here in Sif Yod Aleph a lot of different ways that you could create the necessary kvius so that one person could be motzi the rest with the motzi. Now let's go to Sif Yud Beis. Says the Mechaber. Im hayu roichvim. Let's say you have people that were riding on animals. So you have a caravan of camels, or you have people on horseback back in the day, right? Im hayu roichvim, if a bunch of Yidden were each one riding on his own animal, and then they turn to each other, va'amru, and they say, noichal, let's eat. Okay, now, they weren't, noichal, they said, let's eat, let's go further. Even though each one has his own tuna fish sandwich, literally, each one is eating from his own loaf. It's not that there's a bocah who has one loaf, and he's giving out pieces to the others. No, each one is riding on his own horse. Each one has his own kikar or his own tuna fish sandwich. But what they did was, they looked at each other and said, okay, let's stop and eat. Noichal, let's eat. And continues the Mechaber, and I'm reading the Mechaber now the way the Bir Halacha says we should read it. The next word is sheloi. The Chavetz Chaim says it should be viloi. Viloi yardu meha behemos. They're not getting off their horses. So again, what happened over here? They're riding, and they said, noichal, let's eat. Each one is eating from his own loaf or his own sandwich. V'lo yardu meha behemos. And they're not getting off the animals. They're not getting off the animals sitting down on the ground together and eating. Mitzdarfen, still in all, they join as a group that considered to have kvius, and one person could be motzi the others in the hamotzi. Why? Kevan she'amdu b'makom echad. Since they all stopped, Mechaber didn't spell that out in the beginning, but what happened over here was the camel caravan is plodding along, and then at one point the leader or somebody said, you know what, noichal, let's stop and eat. So everybody stops their animals. Each one stays on his animal. Each one has his own sandwich. But the fact that as a group they said, let's stop and eat, that creates a kvius, and now one person can be made to the rest. Avol, however, continues the Mechaber, im hayu oichlim v'hoilchim. But if it's noichal, let's eat, but let's keep on going. We don't want to lose time. So if the animals continue going while they eat, then loy. Then they lost their kvius. Since they're moving, there's no kvius. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah over here. Mishnah Berurah, ois katan samach aleph. Kevan cha'amdu. If the animals stopped, says the Mishnah Berurah, what the Mechaber wants to say is, the same way we saw in Sif Yod Aleph. If they're kavei amokim, and they say, okay, let's sit down and eat over here, that creates a kvius. So too, if each one is sitting on their camels, and they say, noichal, let's eat, and they stop and eat, that creates a kvius. They're all being yoshiv b'makom echad. They were kavei amokim. Umahani, and this helps, this works, so that one should be able to be motzi the rest. Kevan she'amru noichal, since they said, let's eat, ve'echinu b'zeh makom la'achilosan, and they were kavei makom for their achila, the chanal b'sif yod aleph. So then the halacha of sif yod aleph kicks in. But ois katan samach beis. V'holchim, if they continue going, loy. Pirish, the explanation of this is, loy mahani amir she'amru mitchila noichal. Then the fact that they said noichal doesn't help. Even though they said noichal, that's not considered kviyas makom, and they cannot be, one person cannot be motzi the rest in the hamotzi. And explains the Mishnah Berurah, the halicha mevatel kviyas, because the fact that they're still traveling, that negates any sense of kviyas. Now, interesting shiloh the Mishnah Berurah brings up. V'im yoshvim ba'agola achas. Let's say you have 5 yidden that are traveling by wagon, and they're all sitting in the same wagon, or a car, or a bus. They're all sitting in the same wagon. V'amru noichal kan, and they say, okay, you know what? Let's get together and eat. Let's eat now, in the wagon. V'oichlin yachad, and they eat together. Mistapik ha-Magen Avram. The Magen Avram has a suffix. First of all, the efshe de mitzdarfi. Could be that they take a join as a group in a kvius, and one person can be made to the rest. Because even though in the case of the animals, we say the fact that the animals are continuing to walk, the traveling negates the kvius. But over here, by the animals, each one is sitting on his own animal, and each animal is walking. So the halicha of each individual animal negates the kvius. If they're all sitting on their own animal, but they're not moving, it's okay. So mali if I'm sitting on the animal, mali if I'm sitting on the ground, mali if I'm sitting on a chair. The camel is now a chair. So, okay, if we stopped, I don't care as long as we're not moving. But if we're moving, then the moving negates the kvius. But in our case now, we're all sitting together in one agola. We're all sitting together in one wagon. It's not me in one wagon, you in another wagon, you in another wagon. We're all together in one wagon. And the one wagon is moving with all of us together in it. So, kulam yoshim ba'aguda achas, we're all sitting together as one group. Yesh lemer de mitzdarfen. So the Magen Avram has a suffix. The Magen Avram says, do we say that the same way we say when the camels are walking, the traveling negates the kvius, so the fact that the agola is moving, somehow that negates the kvius? Well, no. Over there, everyone's sitting on a separate animal. So over there's a total lack of kviyas if you're moving. Over here, the agola is moving. So what the agola is moving? We're all in the same moving agola. So what's the difference if it's moving? How does that negate the kviyas? The El Yerabba is of the opinion that we should be mekel, and you should allow one to be motzi the rest. Ubisfina, how about a boat? You're all on the Staten Island ferry together. Poshet afla hamagid avram lahakel de mitzdarfi. Over there, the Magid Avram says it's a davar poshet, that if you're sitting next to each other on the Staten Island ferry, you're considered mitzdarif, you're considered that you have a kviyus, and one person could be motzi the others in hamotzi. The kviyus gomerhu. The Magid Avram says in that case it's a kviyus gomer. Doesn't say why. So one svara that I saw brought down, very interesting, is that in a few different places Chazal suggest that when you're on a boat on the water, Chazal do not look at it that the boat is traveling. Chazal look at it that the mayim is traveling and the mayim is carrying the boat. Fascinating. In that case, das heißt nicht that you're moving. The boat's not moving. The boat is at rest on the water. The water is moving. Kasra achreidim, the achreidim right. The shamish hamishamish b'suuda, the waiter who is serving by the suda, yoitze bebirkas hamotzi im shomea umiskavid lotzeis. He could be yoitze with the berachas hamotzi of the botza, so long as he has proper kavana. Afal pisha hoilech uba tadir, even though he has no kviyus, he's constantly coming and going and coming and going. Ve'ena kavua eitz al shulchan. Still in all, he could go ahead and be yoitze without the kviyus, because that's his kviyus. Okay. Now we go weiter. 3 lines off the bottom, a little bit past the middle of the line, right by the Eis Katan Samach Gimel for the Mishnah Berurah. So we have seen, again, we've seen that there are different ways to create kviyus. So we just saw over here now, you have a caravan of camels. If they all decide, let's eat, let's stop the animals and let's eat, and they all stop in one place, and each one eats on his own camel from his own tuna fish sandwich, that's kviyus. Now, says the Mechaber, v'im hayu oichlim basodeh. Let's say you have 8 yidden that are working in the fields. They're harvesting the crop in the fields. This guy is working in this row. This guy is working on this row. I'm picking tomatoes in this row. And 30 feet behind me, there's another guy, or ahead of me, picking tomatoes in this row. So we're very spread out. But somebody calls out, let's eat. And everybody says, okay. And they all break out their tuna fish sandwiches. And they're all going to sit down and eat where they are. But we're not sitting together as a group. We're all spread out. I'm here. The next guy's 30 feet ahead of me. The next guy's 2 rows over. And the next guy is by the cantaloupe 6 rows over. So says the Mechaber, if they're all spread out, then even if we all decide to eat at the same time, the leader blows the whistle. It's 1 o'clock. It's time to eat. And even if they're eating from one kikar, so I guess maybe each one is getting up and coming and getting a piece from the beitzea and then going back to where he was holding in the field, since they didn't make a kviyas makom to eat together, and they're all spread out, they cannot join as a group. They don't have a kviyas, and one person can't be motzi the others in the berachas hamotzi. The way this should read is v'chein. Similarly, in other words, just like I just told you, that if you're sitting on the camels, if the camels keep on walking, you don't have a kviyus. Similarly, in this case, this is going back on what we learned earlier, really in Sif Yod Aleph. Sha'amru noichal kan, where in the case of Sif Yod Aleph, they made a kviyus by saying, let's eat here. They were kaveh makom. V'yashu lechel, but in our case, it doesn't work because they're spread out all over the field. Why doesn't it work? The be'inan shiyu b'makom echad, because you need kviyas makom in one place. Ice cut and samach dalid, and the mechaber said why this doesn't work. Shaloi kavu makom, because they weren't really kavei makom, and they're eating spread out. Chadin yonahu. This is just a continuation of the sentence. The Mishnah Berurah says, what the mechaber wants to say is shaloi kavu makom b'shas achilasan. The reason they're not mitzaref is because they were not kavei makom at the time that we're going to eat. They're eating all over the place. Therefore, even though the leader blew the whistle and said, okay, let's eat, that does not create a kviyas, because they are not together. Okay, now let's go to Sif Yud Gimel. Says the mechaber. At the end of the day, says the mechaber, heichad loy kavu makom, in a case where they taka were not kavei makom, so we said they don't have kviyus. And since they don't have kviyus, we really want each person to make his own bracha. We don't want one person to be motzi everybody else. Still in all, says the mechaber, heichad loy kavu makom, d'amrinon shekol echad mevarach la'atzmai, where the group was not kavei makom, and therefore we said each person should make his own bracha. Lemaisa im kivei namavarech loitziam. If the botza did have kavana to be motzi everybody else, veheim niskavnu latzeis, and the shoymim had kavana to be yotza with the bracha of the botza, yotzu. They are yotza. You know why? Like I said at the beginning of this year, shemei koina. Yes, in the case of hamotzi, we want kviyas suda, and this is why I made a big deal about this at the beginning of this year. Yes, we want roivam hadras melech. If we don't have roivam hadras melech, then we want each one of you to make your own bracha. Or maybe we're concerned about the requisite amount of kavana. But at the end of the day, there is a halacha of shemei koina. So at the end of the day, if you did what you were not supposed to do, and in a case where you did not have the proper kviyus, the botza had in mind to be motzi the shoymim, and the shoymim had in mind to be yotza with the bracha of the botza, it works. Yotzu. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut in samach. Im kivein pirish b'diavad yotzu, b'diavad yotza. Shelo yitzrichu levarach kol echad elo lechatchila. This requirement, where Chazal in the Mishnah in Brachas said that if you don't have kviyas makom, each person has to make his own bracha, that's only lechatchila. But b'diavad shemei koina rules the day. Shemei koina says, if I made a bracha, and I had a mind to be a motzi you, and you listened, shemei koina. It's as if you said it yourself. And if you had kavanah to be yotza, you yotza. Okay. Vayin b'magen Avram. The Chavetz Chaim says, take a look at the magen Avram. She'eniach yana shulchan aruch b'tzarech iyun. Magen Avram is not happy with this. He's tzarech iyun on this din of the mechaber. Ki yeshma rishayim desavri, because we have rishayim who hold the baloi kavi ein echad yakaloi tzichavei rayaf b'diavad. We have rishayim, and he brings down over here in the Shar Tzion. Okay, back that out for Nun Zion. I'm looking at the wrong one. No, I was looking at the right one. Okay, let's see. Kiyeshma Rishayim, the Mishnah Berurah says, the Ar Rishayim, the Savri will hold, the Baloi Kavi, that without Kviyas, Ein Echad Yachaloi Tzichavei Rayaf B'di'evet. They hold that without Kviyas Malkum, no, one cannot be motzi the other. Now, the Chavetz Chaim says in the Shar Tzion, he says, hold on a second. Upashit, it's a davar pashit. Da'afilu lididhu, even according to these Rishonim, who suggest that without a kviyas makam, one person cannot be motzi another one with a motzi. Ain't davar zeh kiyim in the Rabbanon. That's only you did the Rabbanon. Diminat Torah echad motzi is chaveru b'birkas hamazon afki shelo yechol klal. Midaraisa, either because of a combination of arvus and shemei koina, midaraisa. If you washed and you ate a tuna fish sandwich, I didn't wash and I didn't eat a thing, and you ask me to be motzi you in benching, how can I bench? I didn't eat. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Arvus. Kol Yisrael HaRevim zelazeh. I have an achrayas to help you be yotzi yochiv of berachas hamazon. So midaraisa, I could take out a bencher, I could look at you, I could say berachah, and I could have in mind to be mוציא you in benching, you have in mind to be yotze with my benching, and I'm going to be mוציא you with benching. So says the Chavetz Chaim here in the Shaar Tzion, come on, you're telling me that there are Rishonim that hold that if you don't have kviyus, one person can't be mוציא the other in a hamotzi? He says that has to be a din darabanan. That cannot be a din daraisa. Because midaraisa, Ruvain could be mוציא Shimon even in benching, even if he didn't wash and he didn't eat, because of Arvus and because of Shemei Koina. So he says this is only din darabanan. So again, you see over here that even though the Mishnah Berurah is suggesting that there are Rishonim that hold that without kviyas makom, you can't be mוציא somebody else in hamotzi, it's a din darabanan. It's a din darabanan. You can't stop Shemei Koina midaraisa. You can't stop Arvus midaraisa. But he says over here, Amnam bebir agra chriya ledina, the gra is machriya halacha lemaisa, the divrei Shulchan Aruch ikar, that the words of the Shulchan Aruch are the ikar, and that is that b'di'eved, even without a kviyas makom, if the Beitzea had in mind to be yotze the Shomim, and the Shomim had in mind to be yotze with the berachah of the Beitzea, they are yotze v'da. And you should know, continues the Mishnah Berurah, the din zeh shaykh gam kein beberachas hamazon. This halacha also applies to benching. Heicha deloi kavu yachad. If you did not eat with the kviyas, bein b'shnayim v'bein b'shloisha. Whether you had 3 people, you only had 2. In kiven echad loitzias chaveroi beberachas hamazon. Even though we say halacha lemaisa that you're not supposed to be mוציא somebody else in berachas hamazon unless you had a kviyas with 3 people. But b'di'eved, yotze b'di'eved. If 2 people ate together, Reuven and Shimon ate together, only 2 people, and Shimon asked Reuven to be mוציא him in berachas hamazon, and they both had kavanah, but b'di'eved it works. Okay, let's continue. Top line, Samach Chayim and Aleph, Sif Yud Daled. Im hamesubim rabim. If you have a lot of people sitting together by the Suda. So now you're going to have one, we're assuming now that there is proper kviyas makom. So now you're going to have a Beitzea, you're going to have one person who's going to make the hamotzi out loud, he's going to be mוציא everybody else, and he's going to give everybody else from his challah. That's the case that we're talking about here. Imam Mesubim Rabim, if you have a lot of people eating together, Gadol Shebekulam Beitzea. Who should be the Beitzea? The Gadol. What's called the Gadol? The Gadol b'Torah. The one who's the biggest in Chachma, meaning Chachmas HaTorah, he's the one who should be the Beitzea. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Samach Vav, Rabim, if you have a group. V'hadin Shnayim. Rabim doesn't mean necessarily a multitude. It doesn't mean 20 people. It means 2 at least. And when we say that the Gadol should be the Beitzea, that's if the balabas, let's say the head of the household, or let's say it's a suda of a simcha. So then there's a Baal Simcha. Then the Baal Simcha is the Baal HaSuda. So if you're making a Pidyon Ben, so the Baal HaSuda is the father of the child, or maybe the Kohen. They're the Baal Suda, right? But the guests, even if there's a Talmid Chacham amongst the guests, he's not the Baal Suda. So says the Mishnah Berurah, we're talking over here when the Baal Suda is not here, or there is no distinct Baal Suda. Or they're all Bali Suda. Maybe it's a siyum. They're all making a daf yomi siyum together. So they're all Bali Suda. They all have an equal share in this simcha and this suda. Because if there's a Baal Simcha, if there's a Baal Suda, then the Baal Suda is the Beitzea. Why? Because we want him to be Beitzea ba'ayin yafeh. We want him to give everybody a nice piece. Since it's his, he could give everybody a nice piece. If somebody other than the Baal Suda is the Beitzea, he might be stingy. He might not give out a nice portion. This means in Torah, he's the one that should be Beitzea, and he should be mוציא everybody with his hamotzi. Even if it's in a place where everybody has their own bilkala. So it's not that the Beitzea is going to be mוציא everybody and give out challah to everybody. Instead, let's say it's like by a chasana. By a chasana, we don't have, even though we're going to see later that there's an Indian for the chosin to be the baitzea, but we don't do by a chasana that there's one baitzea, there's one person who makes the bracha and is motzi everybody. No, everybody has their own bilkala by their seat, and everybody washes and makes their own hamotzi. Says the Mishnah Berurah now, even in that format, when everybody has their own challah and everyone's going to make their own bracha, still, the gadol should get the covet of being the first one to make the bracha on his challah and eat from his challah. And everybody should wait for him. Okay, we'll see. It's not negeya berachah, but whatever it is. But that's what the Mishnah Berurah is throwing out over here. So he's saying, you might think that this whole halacha only applies in a scenario where we have to wait for the baitzea. The baitzea is being motzi us in his bracha, and he's giving us from his challah. So okay, so then we should be mechabed the gadol, and everybody's waiting and listening to the gadol. But if we're all sitting around tables, we all have our own challahs, we're all making our own brachas, is there an Indian still to be mechabed the gadol, that he should make his bracha and eat first? Says the Mishnah Berurah, yes, there is. And he brings this down from the Pri Begadim. The chasan at the day of his chasana, baitzea, he should be the baitzea, afal pi sheyesh ba hamesubin gadol mimenu, even though there are bigger people than him. Okay, let's go to the Ramah, second line down. Says the Ramah, Haggah, v'im heim shavim, ve'echad mehen kayin. Okay, so we've just said that you're supposed to be mechabed the gadol to be the baitzea. Okay, let's say there is no real gadol over here. We're all peers. Everybody is more or less the same. But amongst us, there's a kayin. Says the Ramah, v'im heim shavim, ve'echad mehen kayin. If everybody is basically the same, but there's a kayin, mitzvah lahakdimoi, then there's a mitzvah to give the honor and to give precedence to the kayin. Says the Mishnah Berurah, cut and sam teslak dimai. Where does this come from? We've learned about this earlier. Tiksiv, because it says in the Torah Kedosha, vikidashtoi. We're supposed to be mekadesh the kayin. We're supposed to sanctify him. What does that mean? Chazal teach us lechol davar shebikdusha. Whenever there's a davar shebikdusha, the kayin should get the first shot. Liftayach rishon or levarech rishon. He should be the first one to make the bracha and eat. He should get the first aliyah. We always should give precedence to the kayin. Continues the Ramah. How about, second line down, v'im hakayin ha'aretz. Let's say we have a kayin, but the kayin is an ha'aretz. V'im hakayin ha'aretz. In that case, Talmid Chacham kaidem loy. Even though we have a pasuk that says v'kidashtai, so we have a pasuk that tells us that there's an Indian to be mechabed a kayin. If the kayin is an amaretz and we have a Talmid Chacham, then we are mechabed the Talmid Chacham over the kayin. Says the Mishnah Berurah, ois katan ayin, Talmid Chacham kaidem loy, the Talmid Chacham goes first. Not only that, va'aser la Talmid Chacham lakdimai lefanav. The Gemara in Gittin tells us, the Gemara in Megillah tells us that in that scenario, where you have a kayin amaretz and a Talmid Chacham, it's usher for the Talmid Chacham to go ahead and say, no, I want to be mechabed the kayin. It's usher. Why? Umevaza bazeh HaTorah, because that's a bezayin. We're being mevaza the Torah. And we learned this out, the Gemara in Megillah, we learned that from a pasuk in Mishlei, where it says, Misanai Ehoiv Mavis, something like that. Let me see if I could pull it up quickly, because I always hate to misquote a Gemara. This is, to misquote a pasuk. This is Megillah Chavches Amid Aleph. Chavches Amid Aleph. It's a very big daf. Let me see if I can find it quickly. And let's see. Oh, I'm not going to find it if I'm looking at Nunches. It's not Nunches, it's Chavches. No. Chavches. Chavches. Okay. Chavches with Aleph. Here it is. Misanai ahavu moves. Misanai, the Rosh Hashanah says, those who hate me, Misanai ahavu moves. They love death. So says the pasuk in Mishlei. The Gemara in Gittin says, don't read it Misanai, those who hate me. Read it Masni'i, those who cause the Torah to be hated. What does that mean? The Mavaza of the Torah. Because you have a Talmid Chacham, you have a Kohen Amoritz, and you're being Mechabed the Kohen Amoritz over the Talmid Chacham, you're being Mavaza the Torah. That takes precedence over the pasuk of Vikidashtoi. Going back to the Mishnah Berurah's Katan Ayin, V'isa l'kamam b'siman reish aleph, we're going to learn later on in siman reish aleph. The dafke im makdimai l'fan of derech choik u'mishpat kahuna. When we say that the Talmid Chacham is not allowed to be mechabed the Kohen Amoritz, that's if he's doing it mitaras din kahuna. In other words, if he says, no, don't make me the Beitzah, we have a Kohen over here. He's a Kohen, choik kahuna. Give him to be the Beitzah. But if he gives him reshus to be the Beitzah before him, not mitam kahuna, he does it for another reason, then Rashai, he's allowed to do that. Let's go weiter in the Ramah. I want to make sure we at least finish this sif over here. Says the Ramah, third line down near the beginning of the line, the Ramah has another scenario with a Kohen and a Talmid Chacham. Let's say we have two Talmid Chachamim. One is a Kohen, one is a Yisrael. We have two Talmid Chachamim, but the Yisrael happens to be a bigger Talmid Chacham than the Kohen. Then says the Ramah, Toiv lahakdimai, that it would be good to give precedence to the Kohen, because over here you're not being Mavaza the Torah. They're both Talmid Chacham. Aval ein chiyuv b'davar, but it's not a chiyuv. Vayil come on, sif reish aleph. Okay, says the Mishnah Berurah, is cut 9 aleph. Toiv lahakdimai v'isa b'gemara shemi shenizer b'zeh marich yamim b'kach. The Gemara in Megillah brings down a story between two Amoraim, and we prove from that story that you get arichas yamim in such a case. If you're being mechabed the Kohen, you're a Talmid Chacham, he's a Talmid Chacham. You're a bigger Talmid Chacham than the Kohen, but you're mechabed the Kohen, that brings arichas yamim. Okay, let's go. Okay, no, we have to continue the Ramah. Now we go to the words of the Shulchan Aruch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down, near the beginning of the line. Now, like the Mishnah Berurah told me before, this whole discussion is only germane if the Baal Hasuda or the Balabayis is not there. But says the Mechaber, if the Balabayis is there, who Beitzah? Then the Balabayis has to be the Beitzah. Even if there's a gadol sitting around the table, the Balabayis in that case is the Beitzah. Says the Mishnah Berurah's cut 9 bays, Imam Balabayis, return alarm Baal Hasuda she'oichel imayim. If the Baal Hasuda doesn't necessarily have to be the Balabayis. In other words, if you're making a bar mitzvah and you're renting a hall, right? Who's the Balabayis? The Balabayis is the Baal Simcha. The Baal Simcha is considered the Baal Hasuda. Ois Kanayin Gimel Hu Beitzah. The Baal Hasuda is the Beitzah. V'hu Kainam Afilu L'Kayin V'Talmid Chacham. He comes even before a Kayin who's also a Talmid Chacham. Why? Kedei Sheyivtza Ba'ayin Yafeh, so that he should give everybody a nice portion. Ois Kanayin Daled, and this is true V'Afilu Im Ha'Ireach Gadol. Nowadays we're noyig that the Baal Habayis, the Baal Hasuda, the Baal Hasimcha, they're mechabed the Gadol. V'amagad Avram hiskimimai, the Magad Avram concurs. Ach kama achreinim mefakvikin bazeh. Ach besuda shekala mesubin oichel kalechad ve'echad mikikara imavarkal ha'atzman. But certainly if everybody has their own bilkala, and they're all making their own bracha, they're all eating from their own bilkala, in that case, certainly you should have the gadol be the Beitzah. Because ayin yafeh over here is not noigeya. Now let's go to the Ramah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down. Last word on the line. Says the Ramah, v'hamavarech. In all of these scenarios, v'hamavarech, even if it's the gadol being the mavarech, even if it's the balabayas being the mavarech, even if the tati is the mavarech and he's being motzi his household members, v'hamavarech yomer tchila berishus marai v'rabaisai. The botza should always say berishus. We don't say marai v'rabaisai. We say berishus. But the botza should always say berishus. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katnayin. Hey, yomer tchila, haynu afilu hagadol ha'botza. This is true even if the gadol, even if the Talmid Chacham is the one that's being the botza, or the Kayin Talmid Chacham, or the Balabayas. Whoever is being botza over here, he should always say berishus. Haynu afilu hagadol ha'botza or Balabayas. Why? Mishamidas anova, because of humbleness. Tzarich litel rishus, he has to ask rishus ki ilu heim gedolim imenu, as if they're bigger than him. V'lohem no levarich, and really they should make the bracha. Kishayeshem kayin shemitzvah la'akdimai v'chanal. If there's a kayin, in a case where there's a kayin and there's taka mitzvah v'kidashtoi, he's a kayin who is either bigger than everybody else around the table, or shaveh, or equal to everybody else around the table. Im roitza achel l'vtzaya, if somebody else wants to be the b'tzaya, v'hu adin l'berkas hamazon, or somebody else wants to bench, tzarich lita mimenu rishus. They have to get specific permission from him. V'loi mahani mashe yoyme berishus hakayin. It doesn't work to just say berishus hakayin. Im loi nasan loi hakayin rishus, if the kayin did not give explicit rishus. Okay, we're going to stop over here. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The source of limud HaTorah should be Megan against Klal Yisrael. The Berachah should send Yeshua Sefuras Panasat Sheduchim to all those in need. Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael Anasunim Batzaru Ba'Shivya Ha'imdim Bein Bayam U'Bein Bayabasha Hamakim Yerachem Aleihem V'Yotziim Mitzara L'Rvacha Be'Afela La'Oira U'Mishibad L'Geula Hashta B'Agala U'Zman Kariv V'Neimar Amen. Be well.